Captured amid gunfire in Caracas, Venezuela's ousted president Nicolas Maduro has now appeared in a New York court to face multiple drugs and weapons charges. The US accuses him of leading a cartel responsible for flooding the country with cocaine and fentanyl, which he has always denied. Meanwhile, President Trump has made it clear that there is another substance at the top of his mind.
We need access to the oil and to other things in their country that allow us to rebuild their country.
And when asked if he tipped US oil giants off about the attack, he had this to say.
Before and after, and they want to go in.
So what exactly is his plan for Venezuela's vast oil reserves, and will it work?
I mean, you're not going to start throwing billions and billions into a country that hasn't got any clear governance and hasn't got any clear path forward and could end up in civil war.
I'm Paul Brand, and this is What You Need to Know. Joining me for this episode is our international editor, Emma Murphy. Emma, thanks so much for being with me for this discussion. So let's go to the bare bones of it. It sounds pretty obvious to me as a listener that Donald Trump is being quite open about the fact that oil is at least a part of a motivating factor for him in all of this. So how much do you think the whole operation has been driven by oil?
A huge part of it has been driven by oil. Donald Trump is absolutely making no bones about that. He's been very clear from before he took Maduro to afterwards. But let's not forget, this is also driven by power. It's driven by ego. It's driven by geopolitical shifting spheres. It's driven by US hegemony. There is so much behind what is driving Donald Trump to make the move that he's made in the past few days and the moves that he will make in the coming days. I would say that what is not at the heart of this is the Venezuelan people, and any opportunity to try and sell this as a chance to free the Venezuelan people from some terrible tyrannical dictator is pretty hollow, and actually he's not making much of that himself even.
I mean, he said, didn't he, in the press conference that he gave at the outset of this operation to remove Maduro, that this would be great for the Venezuelan people in terms of the oil revenues, and that would go back to the country. But he also seemed to imply quite heavily, not even imply, just sort of said it, that some of that oil revenue will go to America too. So why is Venezuela's oil so attractive to Donald Trump?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of people that have learned more about oil and Venezuelan heavy oil in the last few days than they ever thought they would in their whole life, including me. But one of the key things about Venezuela and its oil is, first of all, the amount of it, about 300 billion barrels. It puts it up there right at the top of the list of oil rich countries. It is about a fifth of the world's entire supply. And the thing about Venezuelan oil is it's the heavy oil. So it's the stuff that doesn't move particularly easily, can't be refined particularly easily, but you can use it in diesel, you can use it in petrol, you can use it in jet fuel, as well as petrochemicals and things like that. So it's very crucial to the American market. It's also something that the American refineries on the Gulf Coast there are really set up to deal with. And they've been getting their supply from Canada. Let's just remind ourselves that's another of those countries that Mr. Trump says he has in his sights. Yeah. So they're not getting the same amount of supply from Canada. They want to try and make these refineries more efficient. They want to make more money from them. And that's why, with a country that's pretty close by geographically, like Venezuela, it's not a bad place to start shipping that oil in from in order to do the refining. It will be big money. Let's not forget this. There will be big profit in it, but it will involve an awful lot of investment because the Venezuelan market has fallen apart. The whole infrastructure of the way that they retrieve the oil has also been completely neglected. So yes, in the long term, it may well make money. I suspect not as much as President Trump is thinking it might, but it will make money for America. And, will it make money for Venezuela? Or the Venezuelan people, hard to know. I suspect they will not be at the top of the list when it comes to all the gold being divvied up. The other issue is, of course, Venezuela has been under sanctions. It's seen such a collapse over the past years. There's been a huge brain drain there. So where once you would have had a workforce that knew what it was doing, that had a huge supply of people that could work in this industry, you haven't got that now. So I suspect if the big American companies want to get involved, it's going to require them bringing in their own people, which again takes that money away from Venezuela itself.
Yeah, I bet Maduro is wishing Elon Musk was still in the administration administration pushing electric vehicles rather than petrol and diesel fueled vehicles. What do you think is Donald Trump's plan here? Because he says he's going to run Venezuela, which is kind of quite a sweeping term that seems to have no detail attached to it. What does run mean when it doesn't have troops on the ground and it doesn't have an administration in charge of Venezuela? In fact, the same regime is still in charge, be it a different presidential figure. What is the plan to start making money out of oil and in inverted commas, run Venezuela?
I don't think it's clear even at this point. Obviously, he has brought in the vice president and what's left of Maduro's operation, as well as the army is still there. I don't think it's going to be the kind of easy push that he thought it was going to be if he, made that assumption. The vice president's already pushing back, saying that, she remains loyal to Maduro. So is the army. One of the big issues in terms of how he's going to run it is how he's going to keep it stable. Now, there had been an attempt to step back from that a little bit over the last few days, probably because they know that this is a nightmare scenario. I mean, America has a pretty good track record of completely messing up the day after when it goes into foreign countries, and they've learnt nothing from any of their previous adventurism, clearly. And I think that will be one of the issues that will be playing on the minds of those big oil investors.
Yeah.
When
will there be stability for them?
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you're not going to start throwing billions and billions into a country that hasn't got any clear governance and hasn't got any clear path forward, and could end up in civil war, could end up in a completely different situation to the one that you want to put, at least $100 billion in.
Yeah. And they've been burnt before, of course, in Venezuela under very different
Exactly.
circumstances. But when they nationalised the oil industry under Hugo Chavez, of course, they lost billions and billions and billions of dollars. So they're not going to want to reinvest in a country where they've already lost money unless they know it's going to be a stable and secure economy in which to do business.
Indeed, and I think President Trump was basically calling everybody together to say, bring your money, bring it into Venezuela, come on, we're going to make a fortune, boys. The reality is very different from that. And although there are some, certainly one of the oil producers who I was speaking to was saying, yeah, we're really keen, we're looking to invest. When you look at the big three, and it's interesting that President Trump suggested that he had actually engaged with them beforehand and tipped them off. That's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that they were more blindsided by that. Even Chevron, which is working in Venezuela under a special exemption, is not necessarily completely aware of what's going on. So President Trump's saying he tipped them off and wants them to bring in the money, but they are pretty strategic business people.
Yeah.
They are going to be thinking very carefully about how they move forward from here, because as you say, they've lost an awful lot in Venezuela over the past, and an unstable country is the last place you want to be throwing your huge amounts of money.
Where do you think this leaves China? Because Venezuela had been, its main customer was China in terms of oil exports. Obviously, Donald Trump is not a major fan of China. Maybe that was part of the calculation for him too, that he could cut off a bit of China's supply here and take that supply for himself. Where does it all leave China, do you think?
Well, China was getting the most of the Venezuelan oil exports, and it was getting those as loan payback in part because of the money that was loaned or lost over the previous years to Venezuela. So the issue for China is how they maintain supply, and the fact that they will now have to start paying an awful lot more for their fuel if they are not getting it through Venezuela. They will also not like the idea that America has got its hands on this level of reserve, if that's what comes to pass. But I think China, probably like everybody else in this, is doing quite a lot of active watching. There seems to be a lot of mentioning of, monitoring situations over the past days. And I think China, as much as anybody, is sort of thinking, okay, where does this leave us? It's not great from an oil point of view. What does it mean geopolitically? Because, of course, what's gone on over Venezuela has completely upended the rules-based order. Now, let's not be naive about this. The rules-based order has been under massive pressure ever since it was first introduced, back in the 1940s. But it has been there. And if you think about other examples of American involvement in foreign countries, say Iraq, at least there was an attempt to keep the United Nations involved there. At least there was an attempt to keep things legal. There doesn't seem to have been in terms of the situation in Venezuela. So China will be looking at that going, okay, this is a shot across the bows to us all, but equally, what can we make from it? And let's not forget, in this world of maximalist power politics, in this world of sort of big man politics, dictator politics, you've got three main players. You've got Donald Trump, you've got China, and you've got Russia.
Yeah.
So do we look here at some kind of carve-up?
This is exactly what I was worrying about the weekend when I was sort of doom scrolling through all of it and then thinking in my own mind, what could the ultimate outcome be of this change in tack? I mean, do you think it's too simplistic to say that maybe Donald Trump carves up the Americas, Putin carves up Europe, and Xi in China, or whoever takes over from him, carves up Asia? I mean, is it going to be sort of three spheres of influence like that, maybe?
Well, it's pretty terrifying as a prospect, isn't it? Especially when everybody can decide what is their backyard. This is obviously America or Trump wanting to have hegemony in his backyard, but he can define how far his backyard stretches. And the same for China and also for Russia. And, thinking back to 2019, there was talk back then that there could potentially be some kind of carve-up between America and also Russia when it came to Venezuela and Ukraine. And that's something that we will see what comes to pass on that. But, your idea that they sort of say China gets Taiwan, America gets Venezuela, Russia gets Ukraine, it is simplistic and it will be much more complicated than that. But it's not something that can be completely ruled out. Equally, even with those power dynamics, there are still the potential complications, because say America does allow, for want of a better word, China to have Taiwan, then that's a huge issue for America itself because of semiconductors. That's going to really compromise the American position. So it's not as straightforward as to say, let's just split this up between the three of us. But there will be an element of that in all of this. And most certainly what's happened in the past few days means that when America, if they are involved at this level still, and the West start trying to say to other nations, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, look, we really need you to help us deal with this situation, that situation, maybe Ukraine is a good example, they can quite happily and legitimately sit back now and go, why? Yeah. Because you can't be shouting and screaming at us about the way that we ought to be doing things, as you've done in the Middle East, as you've done in the Southern Hemisphere, and allow this to happen. Yeah. And it really has weakened everybody's position. The old order was not perfect, but there was a semblance of order. And I think what this has done has completely upended the world order. And it's all now about hegemony, about dominance. And I think, although it's not something that's been discussed that much at the moment, I think nuclear power. Wow, because if you haven't got a nuclear weapon at the moment in this world, you certainly would be wanting to get one or cozy up to somebody with a good alliance who's got one themselves.
Never in my lifetime have I felt quite so much like I live in a small island nation. Quite frankly, it is quite terrifying. And you see the response from our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, to all of this, not really saying very much at all. I mean, I guess that's partly because he doesn't want to upset Donald Trump.
Well, everybody's being so cautious, aren't they?
They really are.
They're desperately trying to keep everything on side. What's going on must be as shocking to them as it is to everybody else watching. Yeah. They've just got to somehow try and navigate it that they don't lose any hold whatsoever on America or on President Trump, which is probably more what it is in America now.
Yeah. Although, even when we do have influence, does it make that much difference? I don't know. Emma, we're going to talk about this a lot more, I am sure. Thank you so much for your time. For more analysis from Emma and the rest of the team, head to itv.com/news and follow us on YouTube.